Thank you, President Olens and Kennesaw State University, for inviting me to speak today. And thank you to the graduates of the class of 2017 and your families for letting me share this special day with all of you. When I was asked to speak today, I was very honored and very nervous. You see, I know how important today is for all of you. Today marks an important milestone in your lives. For graduates, you have made it. You are a full-fledged grown-up prepared with the skills and education you need to make it out in the world. For parents and families, today, a significant part of your job is done. You've launched your young person into the world, and hopefully this means that your bank account will get a little relief. My job today is to share a few words of inspiration, and preparing for this speech gave me a chance to think back to my own graduation and ask myself the question, what do I wish somebody had told me when I was 22 years old? What advice would I have wanted to hear? But what I've realized is that you have already heard lots of useful advice. Your entire lives, people have been telling you what to do, and the beauty of what happens next is that you get to decide now what advice you take and how you apply it to your life, and you get to put your own spin on it. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to share a bit of my story with you and a few guiding principles that have helped me along the way. And then we can continue with a celebration that you have rightly earned. So, I grew up in a small town in South Texas, 20 minutes from the Mexican border. My mom is from Mexico, and my dad is Mexican-American, born and raised in Texas. My parents married and had me at a very young age, and for both of them, I represented all of their hopes and dreams for a better life. My mom and dad loved me and my brothers and sisters deeply, but we also grew up in a home with a lot of worry and anxiety. You see, my parents had both experienced significant trauma growing up, and they carried the effects of that trauma into their adult lives. My father was a teacher, the first in his family to go to college, and while that in and of itself was a huge accomplishment, he had actually wanted to be a lawyer. He had started law school, but had dropped out in his first semester because of personal struggles. So from the moment I can remember, my father told me two things. One was that I was going to go to college and it was going to be Harvard, and two, that I was going to be a lawyer. That was his big dream for me. For my mother, the main thing she wanted for me was to marry a good man who could take care of me and provide for me. It was important to her then that I be agreeable and attractive, because if I could find a good husband, everything would be okay. It wasn't that my mom didn't want more for me. It was just that the women in her life had not had the privilege of getting an education, and they were entirely dependent on the men in their lives. My mother's main goal for me was that I find love and security. And while my parents loved us because of their past, they were both almost debilitatingly overcome with worries. That we wouldn't have enough money, that something bad would happen to us, or that the world would fall apart. My mom dealt with her fears by not doing anything risky and avoiding conflict at all costs. And my dad dealt with it in the best way that he knew how, by relying on the pursuit of financial security and recognition. He'd battled addiction throughout my early childhood, and although thankfully he eventually got sober, his underlying anxiety and depression never fully went away. As you can imagine, my siblings and I grew up as really anxious kids. I felt like I had to avoid catastrophe at every turn and dealt with my anxiety by trying to make everything perfect. In high school, I was a straight-A student, I was a cheerleader and a musician, I was the consummate people pleaser. I didn't break any rules, I didn't party, I never disagreed with my friends or my teachers. And my singular goal was to have everyone like me. If everyone liked me, life would be okay. And to the outside world, it seemed to be working. But inside, I was a wreck. I was always afraid I would fail or disappoint, and trying to be perfect was taking a toll on my physical and mental health. But I somehow kept it together, and I did end up accomplishing one of my dad's dreams. I got into Harvard, and after high school graduation, I headed off to college. College was amazing. I loved my classes, and like many of you, I met so many interesting, smart people to whom this day are my closest friends in life. But despite loving college, I still struggled. I still had a lot of anxiety about what I did and how I looked and whether people liked me. And I also struggled academically my freshman year. Some of you may be able to relate. Even though I had done well in high school, I wasn't prepared for the type of work I was expected to do in college. I also realized that many of my classmates had gotten an amazing high school education, while others of us had gone to schools that were so overcrowded that you couldn't walk in the halls, or that didn't offer AP classes or extracurriculars. Some of my classmates had had every opportunity in life given to them, and others barely got the minimum they needed to get by, much less to succeed. Despite this painful realization, and despite battling my ever-present anxiety, I kept going. One of the best things that happened to me in college was that I joined a student organization called City Step, a program that worked with inner-city kids to promote self-expression through dance. I loved working with kids that had similar backgrounds to mine and watching them open up and thrive. I developed a love for teaching through these experiences and was chosen to co-lead City Step my last 2 years in college. In that role, I realized that I had a knack for leading teams and managing others. And I also met amazing people who wanted to help change the world by helping others. One of those people was a very handsome former football player named Frank. Frank shared a similar upbringing as mine, and he cared about the same thing I cared about. He and I got to know each other and started dating my senior year. I fell head over heels in love. But I was a senior, and I had to figure out what I was going to do after college graduation. I applied to law school because that was what I was supposed to do, and I also applied to an organization called Teach for America. Through Teach for America, recent college graduates would teach for 2 years in low-income neighborhoods. TFA promoted all the things that I was passionate about: social justice and educational equity. But in addition to wanting something to do after graduation, I wanted to stay close to Frank. My feminist self did not want to admit it, but I shared some of my mom's desires for my life. Frank was 2 years behind me in school, so he'd be staying in Boston, so I applied to law schools that were close by. When acceptances started rolling in, I learned that one of my biggest fears had come true. I had not gotten into any law schools in the area. I did get into one school in Texas with a scholarship, but Texas was so far away, and neither Frank nor I had the funds to be able to travel back and forth. Luckily, I had one other option. I had been accepted to Teach for America to teach in the South Bronx in New York City. I now had an important decision to make. Would I go to law school and say goodbye to Frank? Or would I say no to law school and teach? One of the hardest conversations I had was when I told my father that after graduation, I would be moving to New York City to teach. My dad had worked extra jobs and sacrificed so that I could stay in and finish college, and now I was saying no to his dream. But I declined my acceptance to law school, and that summer after graduation, I moved to New York. The 2 years I spent teaching are still some of the hardest 2 years of my life, and I know there is a special place in heaven for teachers who dedicate day in and day out to making their students the best people they can be. Frank and I stayed together those 2 years, and we took turns riding the Greyhound bus to see each other whenever we could. I should have been happy, but instead I was still racked with insecurity and fear. What if I had taken too big of a risk? What if I had made the wrong choice? What if Frank and I broke up? What was I doing in New York City where I had no family and knew no one? I couldn't enjoy my life because all I was worried about was how it was all going to turn out. But in the midst of all this self-doubt and anxiety, something unexpected happened. I was teaching in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the entire country. My students were beautiful, bright, funny, amazing kids full of potential. But the statistics showed that most of them would never make it out of poverty. I was furious at the unfairness of it all and became more and more convinced that I wanted to make change, not just for their lives, but for the lives of all kids. Up until then, I had been focused on what was expected of me. Go to college, find a partner, assemble the perfect life. But now I was focused on something else. You see, I had found my purpose in that classroom in the Bronx. I needed to take all of my life experience and all of my academic training to help make things right for my students and for other kids across this country. So, after a couple of years of teaching, I reapplied to law school and got in. But now it was my dream, not somebody else's. I knew why I was going. Today, I fight for those who don't have a voice. And when I sat in your seat many, many years ago, I had no idea where I would end up. However, throughout my journey, I have tried to live according to a few rules, and I want to share them quickly with you today as you begin this new chapter in your life. First, dream big. My guess is that there are many of you sitting here today who have had to overcome struggles and obstacles to make it. Some of you are the first in your families to finish college. Some of you have had to overcome trauma or financial difficulties or health issues to be able to sit here today. Undoubtedly, you all know somebody who started college with you but did not make it to the finish line. What was it that made the difference for you? What sustained you? Likely, it's that you and that the people who love you who are gathered here today had big dreams for your life. For many years, I had mixed feelings about the fact that my dad had pushed me so hard, insisting that I go to a great college and go to law school. But what I eventually came to appreciate was that my father was dreaming big for my life. And in the process, he was teaching me to do the same. He could never have envisioned the life I live now, but by setting what author James Collins calls big, fat, hairy, audacious goals, he was claiming big things for my life. Today, I am the executive director of Achieve Atlanta, an organization dedicated to ensuring that low-income and first-generation kids earn their degree. Before we started this work, only 14% of Atlanta public school students were projected to earn a degree within 6 years of their high school graduation. Only 14%. Compare that to nearly 70% of wealthy students who are projected to get their degree. Many of the students my organization serves comes from poor communities and may be the first in their family to go to college. If we didn't have the ability to dream big and believe that we could actually close the gap between low-income and wealthy kids, there is no way that we could change things for our students. So I challenge each and every one of you to dream big for your future. For some of you, your dreams may come into conflict with the dreams of your loved ones, like mine did for a while. Parents and families, you may be worried about the choices that your graduate is making about his or her life. Try not to be. We each have to own our own dreams to be able to make them come true. I used to be afraid of dreaming because I was afraid of failing. Now I know that if your dreams don't scare you, they aren't big enough. As you embark on this next chapter in your life, get clear on your big dreams and get to work. The second thing I want to encourage you to do is pursue purpose, not perfection. We live in a society that tells us that the big house and the nice car and the fancy title are what we should aspire for. And we think these things will make us happy because we believe that pursuing these things are the same thing as following your purpose. Now, don't misunderstand me. There is nothing wrong with doing well financially. But don't confuse external rewards for purpose. Purpose is the thing that creates meaning in your life and becomes your central motivation for what you do. When you have purpose, That feeling that something is missing goes away. For a long time, I focused on being perfect at what I did and how people perceive me, and that quest for perfection nearly did me in. But after years of self-reflection, I realized that being perfect was my way of trying to make sure that nothing bad happened, that I didn't fail. Well, if you haven't experienced it already, you will someday. You will fail. Some of you may be sitting here today with no idea of what you're going to do next. You may not have gotten the job that you wanted, or you may not have gotten into the graduate school you wanted to attend. But let me reassure you, it will all be okay. To fail is to be human, and if you've never failed, you've never taken a big enough risk. What saved me from the fear of failure was what happened in my classroom in the Bronx, when I found my purpose to make sure that every child in this country has the opportunity to live a good and decent life, my path became clearer. Some of you already know your purpose, and some of you may not know yet. To find your purpose, I encourage you to ask yourself these questions. What am I good at? What comes easy to me? What brings me joy? When I look back at my life, the thing I was good at was helping others be the best that they could be. If you are pursuing perfection, you'll be drained and anxious and maybe even depressed. But if you find your purpose, you'll be excited and energized because you'll love what you're doing. Find your purpose and give your all to it. The beauty is that purpose does not require perfection. It only requires commitment. And finally, find love. This is not advice that you hear very often in a graduation speech, but I've always been a person who listens to both her head and her heart. My mom encouraged me to find love, and for her, love was finding someone who could provide for you. But I've been privileged to be able to expand that definition. For me, love means bringing out the best in somebody else. And when someone loves you, they bring out the best in you. And you can find love in many forms. Yes, through a romantic partner, but also through your family and your friends. And most importantly, through loving yourself. And the irony is, you have to be imperfect to find love. As psychologist Brené Brown reminds us, we cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable selves to be deeply seen and known. As you sit here today, think of all the people you love and all the people who love you back. Love will sustain you. Indeed, it already has. Frank and I did end up getting married, and the risk we took paid off. In a few weeks, we'll celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary. And we have 2 teenagers who, God willing, will be sitting in your seats in a few years. But most importantly, I've learned to love myself, imperfections and all. And that has made all the difference. For as the famous Nat King Cole sang, the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. Congratulations, class of 2017. I hope that you find purpose and love and that all your big dreams come true.